Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to make a motion to put Bill 99-33 into the third reading file. I'd like to discuss.
You may proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Bill 99 is a first step into addressing Guam's rape problem. If you read the title says anti-hormone or anti-androgen pilot treatment program, but really it's chemical castration. And I want to be clear on that because I don't want to try and make light of the situation that we have a serious problem on Guam that needs to be addressed with serious solutions. When you look at the numbers, Madam Speaker, and I really would like this bill to be strictly about the numbers. I know when you're standing up here, you have to sell your bill. Hopefully, I don't have to do too many selling. The numbers will speak for itself. When you look at Alaska, which is the biggest state in the country, landmass, they have about close to 1 million people. There is nothing in common that Guam has with Alaska, maybe other than catching fish. The only thing that we have in common with Alaska is we are neck and neck with them when it comes to rapes. We are right next to Alaska, which is almost 10-to-1 of men versus women in Alaska. Per 100,000 population, we're more than twice the national average. Twice. Recidivism rates are up. Reports are up. But solutions are down. We have no solution. This problem is not going to solve itself, Madam Speaker. We're not going to wake up one morning and act as if there is no problem and act as if we've found a solution. We haven't. I do believe that it takes a village to raise a child. I do. And it takes this legislature to protect that child and women, who are our most vulnerable victims. It's our duty to do that. It's our responsibility to make sure we find those solutions. The numbers, Madam Speaker, are staggering. They're frustrating. They make you shake your head. How did we get this far and why? But we're beyond that. We need to find solutions. This legislature needs to find solutions. And I know throughout the last couple of days, there have been many questions. The hows, what, whys, the wheres, side effects, long-term, short-term. This isn't a silver bullet that's going to save all of our problems or totally eliminate this problem of rape. Is it a perfect solution? It's about as close as perfect as you're going to get. My staff, my legal counsel, they've worked tirelessly to do their research, and I know they were up till maybe 1 o'clock in the morning at the office yesterday doing their final research to make sure that all of our dots were dotted and our T's were crossed. So I know there's a lot of questions, and I just want to also state publicly, Madam Speaker, that whenever we do something here in the legislature, whether it's passing a budget or passing a bill or debating a bill, there's always going to be questions. There's always going to be different sets of opinions, whether it's from the experts off island or whether it's from right here in this body. Sometimes we'll have the answers to those questions and sometimes we won't. But I do believe when you look at the numbers, and you look at the solutions to these numbers, this is a step closer to achieving a goal of eliminating repeat offenses when it comes to rape. Every day that we don't try and address this problem, Madam Speaker, we are putting people in our community at risk. Right now, there's over 3 repeat offenders, just going off the numbers, that are in our villages, every village. There's about 60 repeat offenders on Guam, almost 900 total convicted offenders. There are side effects. Side effects such as weight gain, osteoporosis, which is the longest term side effect that there is, leg cramps, hypertension. That's the side effect for the perpetrator. But what's the side effect for the victim? There was when you do the research, there's a few humanitarian arguments, and one of those humanitarian arguments was the state of Michigan. And the only reason why they had that argument was because in 1984 the FDA did not approve the medicine or the treatment. And that argument is kind of moot now because it's been approved. Depo-Provera, or otherwise known as MPA. There is also a cost analysis or a cost-benefit analysis, if you want to use that. And before I get to that, we'll just talk a little bit about the recidivism rate, Madam Speaker. When used as a mandatory condition of parole, chemical castration decreases the occurrence of repeat offenses from 75% to 2%. Now, and the numbers that we went off, and we even took some of the language for the bill, comes from Europe. And Europe has adopted chemical castration since 1929. They're the first to adopt it. And they have a problem as well. But when the treatment for the released offender is taken, and this is once a week, it drops to almost 73% to just 2%. Denmark is 2.2%. California was the first state to adopt it in 1996. How much does it cost? It costs a fraction. And I don't want to use this treatment as a get out of jail free card. Absolutely not. I don't mind compromising with options, but I would really have a problem with compromising the fact that they could use this treatment as a get out of jail free card, because the cost analysis benefit saved us money in the long term, because there is a huge disparity between how much it costs to incarcerate someone and how much it costs to give them the castration treatment. And the castration treatment is basically about $12,000 a year, whereas incarceration is $43,000. So those numbers are geared towards, with all of our problems that we have at the Department of Correction, geared towards saving money. But I wouldn't want this to be a leverage tool that they can use to get out of jail free. I do believe they should serve every single day that they were given. But when they're in the government's responsibility, that we ensure that when they're sitting next to our daughters, our granddaughters, our mothers, our aunties, that they're safe using this treatment. Every one of us here has a daughter, has a granddaughter, has a mother. And when you think along those lines, you want to be as safe as possible. I know I want my kids to be as safe as possible. when they're by themselves with their mother at the mall, at the movies. We've seen just in the last couple of days a video that has gone viral of some of the crimes that is committed. It happens every day, but we don't see it. But when we see it, we're appalled. I'm sure if we saw some of these 879 offenses, we would be appalled. So, Madam Speaker, I know there's going to be a lot of questions. I have as much research that I will share with the body. I just hope that the 15 or 14 or however many senators there are in this room today can legislate like if that was their own kid or their own family member that they were legislating for. Because when you put it in that perspective, it becomes much more clear of how we need to find a solution. Not divide each other in this legislature, but to find a solution together and speak with one language. And I'm not saying that I have the language in this bill or the structure or the solution by myself. I willingly ask the body to make this bill better. If there's options that need to be put in this bill, let's put the options. Let's find a balance. As my good friend Senator Atta would say, Tom Atta, let's find that sweet spot. Let's find it. But let's not retreat. Let's make sure that we fight these offenders every single day.
Madam Speaker, I take that. I don't think I never said anything about finding a sweet spot. I'll take that back.
Not for this bill, but just in general. Not for this bill, just in general. So that's
Yes, please.
I hope the body can agree.
Please clarify that. Senator Tom Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I certainly applaud the author's intent with the bill. Yes, we do want to make our community as safe as possible. And I too have, I've got 2 daughters, I've got 3 granddaughters. I certainly am always concerned about their safety, and we want, their environment to be safe. But how we go about that, of course, is open to debate. Now, if you take a look at this bill, the bill is mandatory. And I think the way the bill works is that when an individual is up for parole, prior to that, the Department of Corrections will basically identify potential candidates for chemical castration. And that then basically they would be given this option of being chemically castrated. And it almost seems as, at least from my understanding of the bill, is that if you don't agree to chemical castration, kiss parole off, because you're not going to go out there. And for me, I just find that kind of a false sense of security that we're going to parole a guy because he has volunteered. We're going to parole a rapist because he has volunteered to be chemically castrated, as if suggesting that that's it, chemical castration, this guy is about as safe as they can be. And that's not the case, because although, the sponsor of the bill has indicated that studies have shown in Europe that recidivism rate has gone down to, for those who are chemically castrated, to be as low as 2%. Whereas those who were put on parole and were not chemically castrated, their recidivism rate was probably on the order of 50%. But, you keep on researching this, and first of all, we don't know what the parameters were of those studies. So, to just take that number off the top We don't really know. I mean, for that matter, the people who were chemically castrated and had a low recidivism rate, for all intents and purposes, they could have been sheep herders out in the field with just them and the sheep. So, it's unless we know the details of those statistical studies, I wouldn't go to the extent of saying, hey, chemical castration, that's it. That's a real significant contribution to the safety of our community. Now, there was the question about the cost of the program. Now, in my readings, I found that at least the information I came across was that the cost of, and the way chemical castration works is that, as the author had indicated, is that the individual has to come in and that program has to be continuous. You keep taking the pill. Otherwise, if you don't take the pill, then it wears off. And the whole intent or the effect of the pill is to reduce the libido of the individual so that there's just no desire, no sex drive at all. And so it's got to be a continuous program. And the cost estimate that I came across in my research was the cost of the treatment is about $40,000 a year, versus if you kept the individual incarcerated, the cost of that incarceration was about $80,000. So yeah, it is a cheaper alternative, but I think it's a false sense of security that for $40,000 you're gonna be able to release a rapist who will no longer, or the chances of committing another rape is practically eliminated. The chances of him doing it again, him or her doing it again, is maybe down to like 2%. In my mind, if an individual is going to be paroled, I mean, people get paroled on the basis of how they've demonstrated that they have in fact corrected their ways and that they do merit being released to go out and start a new life and be a contributing member of society. But my gosh, if that parole is going to be based on this this idea that chemically castrating this individual is going to now make him a safe member of the community, I think is a kind of paints a false sense of security. But then we also set up, according to the bill, the individual has to, a person required to, under page 4, under the provision of cost, it reads, a person required to undergo a program of hormone or anti-androgen, such as whatever the medication is, shall pay or reimburse all costs of the program directly to the department, agency, or organization administering the treatment program. These individuals, when they leave prison, are going to have a hard enough time finding a job to keep body and soul together, much less stepping out there with this large bill that they have to pay. So again, it's I think it kind of sets up a false sense of security, that the chemical castrations can do it. Now, as I was going through my research, I came across this one interview of an individual who has been in recovery for the past 15 years. He was convicted of a child molestation, and he was in prison for 5 years. And basically this individual says, the best defense we have against rapists is we need to make sure that things that we have, such as the sex offender registry, are kept up to date. And we know that that's not necessarily the case here. Maybe that's where we need to be focusing our efforts on. We as citizens also need to take the time and the initiative to bring up this sex offender registry and find out who's in my village so that, we know who's around us. We're more aware of our surroundings. And when we see that individual, then, stay away from it or put your guard up. He also mentioned about the fact that, at least on his part, who's really not wanting to get back into the same situation, he talked about he avoids situations that might get him aroused and stays away from that. So I'm just wondering if we're barking up the wrong tree. And yes, I agree. It's the sponsor himself indicated this is not a silver bullet. I don't believe in silver bullets either, but I'm not sure this is a bullet worth expending, simply because it gives a false sense of security. And I think the most saddest part of this is if it conveys this false sense of security, then it might get people to let their guard down and end up in something tragic. So, inasmuch as I agree with the intent of the program, I really have some serious concerns. Now, the most serious concern that I have is the fact that the program is mandatory, and then that kind of just opens up another layer of concerns about from the legal standpoint, challenges. I mean, there's legal organizations out there that would challenge something like this, and I'm not even gonna go into that, but that certainly is an issue that needs to be addressed. So I do have some serious concerns with the bill. And I'm hoping, and I ask my colleagues, that for those who support it, please rise and speak as to why you support it, why you think mandatory chemical castration is important. Because I want to listen to those points of view. I would also like to hear the points of view of those who don't agree with chemical castration. And finally, in closing, chemical castration, as opposed to a surgical castration where they actually remove the testicles, and that's a permanent fix. We're talking about men who are rapists. But we also have women who have been convicted of rape. So what about them? How do we handle that? So there's a lot of open questions, but I'm happy that the bill has been introduced because it starts a discussion, and we need to discuss it to see how we can begin addressing this particular problem. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion. The motion, of course. Your motion is to place it on third reading. Is there anyone who would like to speak on the motion? Senator Torres, you're recognized.
Hafa Madam Speaker. As we sit in this body, a lot of times we're very affected by what happens in the news. And in our jobs, we have a lot of people that approach us looking for help. And the idea of addressing a criminal who violates a very vulnerable section of our community in such a way that it really cuts to the very fiber of our being. Rape is perhaps the most invasive and cruel act of violence that any woman can experience. And as the author pointed out, men as well. But when we think about what is just, in our body, we've also had in prior discussions the topic of criminals and people who are incarcerated, and how we have a right also to protect the liberties of our criminals, those that are detained. We've had discussions in this body about the conditions at the prison and are they cruel and unusual, and how we have an obligation to provide for people who don't have the ability to care for themselves, who are not in a position because they're now incarcerated, to give them at least the basic standards that one would attribute to a decency in existence. As I look at this legislation, what troubles me the most about it is, yes, it addresses those concerns that we have about what to do with these people who commit these horrible crimes against women, these heinous crimes. What do we do with them? How do we make sure we have peace of mind? How do we know that when they're out on parole, that they're not going to repeat their offenses? And the easy way is to come up with something like this. Well, this is one way that we can have some assurance that we're addressing it. This and psychotherapy, other things. But what bothers me about this is the compulsory side of it. If we go back to my previous discussion about how we've considered the prisoners and whether they're afforded medical care as they're entitled to, whether they're afforded a decent place to stay, whether their food is adequate. What I worry about this is when we impose this medical castration on as a condition of parole, when we impose it as a mandatory condition, what we're really doing is we're imposing on their civil liberties, I believe. The judicial system allows for people to rehabilitate. When we look at this legislation, what this drug does is it really cuts into the behavioral characteristic of the individual. And because it's a behavioral altering drug, it intrudes into the personality of the individual, and in some ways can be argued that it's a violation of the First Amendment. Does this amount to cruel and unusual punishment when you impose a behavioral altering drug on an individual? Make it mandatory. I think that that's something that we have to be a little cautious about. Also, I wonder if having this legislation as a condition of parole takes away the involuntary, makes it an involuntary and a coerced act upon these parolees. We have this many of us who have been through the medical institutions, one of the practices that I've noticed is there's always the consent of the patient that's being considered. There's always that consent. Do you know what the procedure is? Do you know what the circumstances are? Do you agree? Do you consent? And what this bill does is it takes that consent away. It takes away that choice. And when you think about what this drug does is, yes, it lowers the testosterone, but it also alters the characteristic of the individual. And I think that we need to be a little cautious because I believe that we're really cutting now into what should be protected. The civil liberties of the individual should be protected. And although in concept I agree with treatment, I agree with looking at different alternatives to treatment, what I am opposed to is the concept of making it compulsory, especially in circumstances like this where you alter the person's behavior and you impose on them a medical practice that is repetitive, that requires supervision. That is an issue. And then there's also the concern that if the person really is as the retiring speaker brought up, if a person is out on parole, the premise is that they've served their time and they've reached a point where they're deemed to be releasable back into this the community so that they can begin to rehabilitate themselves and assimilate into the community. What this medical castration does is it imposes another layer of punishment on them in some ways. Yes, it is a deterrent for future sexual behavior that is, adverse to the community, and there can be argued that, that it is a good thing, but what it really does is the punishment is continual on the person when they are paroled. So I would caution against that. I'm mostly just thinking that we have to be a little concerned about the individual as an individual who's going through the judicial system and going through the reform system, and whether this is really appropriate to make it compulsory. The type of treatment, certainly, but to impose it and make it mandatory, I think that we're cutting into civil liberties, and we really should be a little more conservative in that regard. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion to place on third reading, is there anybody else who would like to speak? Senator Underwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I agree with the previous speakers in their opposition to the bill, but actually I want to approach this from just my disappointment over the fact that the bill itself and the report that accompanied it did not include the fiscal note, and I know that they may have requested that, but in light of the fact that there is a potential cost to the government regarding this proposal, that I believe that a fiscal note really is needed with this bill. We need to know the estimate for what this would cost the government. In the event that the individual is unable to pay for this, to pay for the surgery or to pay for the chemical, or even for the physician, who is going to pay for it if it's already mandatory? And most likely it will be, again, the government. And so it's disappointing that for a bill of this nature, and with the intent to protect the victims, that there wasn't that type of attention to putting the package together. The other analysis that I had made of the accompanying report is that the testimony that was included really only, I think, had 3 individuals. It lacked testimony from the Department of Corrections. It lacked the testimony from the Territorial Parole Board, the Judiciary, or even the Office of the Attorney General. I would think that these entities, that the author of this bill would have sought the input of these entities, because they are all involved in the sentencing of those who commit crimes. And finally, it's a pilot program. If you recall, when the Department of Education had initiated, or we addressed the bill for a pilot program for the early learning, for early childhood, or for pre-K with DOE, the pilot program had a beginning and an end. When we're talking, or when we have a bill that's proposing a pilot program that is going to involve the lives of people, the physical well-being of an individual, whether they are guilty of the crime or not, I would think that there would be a more stringent description within this bill itself about what that pilot program is aiming to achieve. It should be very clear when this is going to start and when the pilot program will end. This doesn't have an end. This doesn't indicate here what the ending is for the pilot program. You know, a pilot program is a test. And if you're testing, when then are you going to, when are you going to measure the effectiveness? So I just want to express my disappointment with the lack of care by which this bill had been crafted and presented. And I, again, also stand in concurrence with the previous speakers about their concerns. Their concerns about the effectiveness of the program and whether really this is going to deter further assaults to our people here in Guam, not only women, children, but also males. So, Madam Speaker, I don't support this bill, and I don't support this bill going to the third reading file. It should go back to committee.
Okay, so that's, I know the original amendment was, motion was to send to third reading, so now we have an objection to having the bill go to the third reading, and of course that could now generate a different discussion in terms of it going down to the third reading.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. The way I understood it, it was not so much an objection for it going down. I think the concept, it sounded like the previous speakers who were more objecting to the concept of the bill as opposed to objecting to it going down to third reading.
Yes.
So I just want to make sure that there's a distinction.
She did say, and
she did say it should go down. She did not make a motion, Madam Speaker, or she did not say I objected to this going down third reading, or she did not say I moved to put this into committee. I just want to make that clarification, Madam Speaker.
And okay, I'm going to take a brief recess and make sure I check with the clerk, but I thought I heard, unless of course the Senator, you want to clarify whether you're objecting to the bill going to third reading, because remember that's the original motion, is to send it to the third reading. So I asked if there's anyone who would like to speak on the motion. No, the motion, okay, wait. Let me do this over again. Your original motion was to place on the third reading. And then, no, I didn't gavel it in yet because it didn't go down. Because what it is that your motion was to send to third reading, so then there is the debate. And several, of course yourself, pushing forward for it to pass and go to third reading. A couple didn't say that they are opposed to it going to third reading, but they do oppose the bill. The third speaker, of course, said that she opposes the bill, but also opposes it going to third reading. Now, the only thing now here to do would be to ask, of course, the last speaker whether she wants to place that, then actually the fact that she says she opposes it going to third reading, then the question will be that then there is an objection, so therefore I would call for the vote for it to go down to the third reading.
Mm-hmm. Madam Speaker, if we could take a recess to consult with the legal counsel.
The legislature is back in session. The last speaker, Senator Underwood, when you were speaking, you've made some statements, but they were not in a motion form. And so to clarify for the benefit for the members is that in your statement, what is, or are you going to make a motion, or are you just stating basically an objection?
Madam Speaker, I clearly have made my statement about the weaknesses of the bill, and I would state that this bill really should go back to committee, and therefore I will specifically state that I'm making the motion that this bill be sent back to committee.
So there's a motion on the floor now.
Yes, it's a new.
No, it's not.
To send back,
To send back to committee.
it's a non-debatable. Let me double check, but that's what I understand.
Madam Speaker, if you could consult with legal counsel just to make sure.
The legislature is back in session, and Senator Underwood had made that motion to refer back to the committee. And the question was, of course, whether it is a debatable procedure or not. And the standing rules in two places where it says to place in an inactive file, which in this particular case it isn't, that is a debatable motion. But to commit or refer, now that is a not debatable procedural motion.
I object, Madam
Okay,
Speaker.
so is that clear?
I object.
So there, yes, and there is, of course, an objection. And so on the motion, then to refer back to committee, then, and there is an objection, please raise your hand to send back to committee. Okay, the motion fails. So to continue on then with the motion to place on the third reading file, is there anybody else who would like to speak on Bill 99 on that motion? Senator Frank Hugin, then Vice Speaker. Blas, I'm sorry. Senator Frank Blas, Jr.
Good morning, Madam Speaker.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill. Madam Speaker, as I sat here and I listened to the discussion, I think that it is in everybody's true intent to want to be able to address and maybe provide a means to be able to reduce the possibility of a reoccurrence or recidivism that occurs amongst individuals in this particular type of offense. And I applaud the author and the co-sponsor to this legislation in being able to provide what I feel is a viable alternative and a viable means to be able to address this. Is it, and as it was stated earlier, is it a silver bullet? Will it stop? Is it 100% guaranteed? Nothing in life. The only thing in life is guaranteed two things: death and taxes. And I don't think this bill proposes to do any one of the two. I do feel compelled the need to address the issue and the concern with regards to the costs on this and why there is no fiscal note. It clearly states in basically page 4, starting on line 19, the cost. The cost of this obviously is going to be borne on the individual that's going to be going through the program. And I also recognize and I appreciate the concerns that individuals have with regards to the compulsory or the mandatory means with which this should be employed. I too have an issue with regards to, whether or not it should be compulsive, it should be mandatory. Maybe there are issues. Maybe there are other alternatives. But I think that the great thing about this being before the body is that it brings the ideas, the deliberations, the concerns, and the new ways of being able to look is to make this a better bill. I think that at the end of the day, nobody in this body is going to want to say that we don't care. I don't think, and I haven't heard that. And I haven't, even for those individuals that outright oppose the method of which this legislation proposes. And so, along those lines, maybe some of the question, there is another question that I have that maybe the author can yield to and maybe can help to satisfy some of the concerns with the individual, with the rest of my colleagues or some of my colleagues, is in the issue with regards to, as a result of the screening, if the individual is found that they may be allergic to the drug, or there may be there may be some medical condition an adverse medical condition that may be caused as a result of the utilization of this drug. Does this now then, in essence, make this individual ineligible for the program, therefore also ineligible for parole or for probation? So I pose that question, and hopefully the author or somebody could yield and provide me that kind of that information.
Senator, as the primary author, do you yield to the question?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the previous speaker as well for his concern. We do have an exemption, and that would be person who is medically evaluated by a competent physician would be exempt of this treatment, and that's 80-101B3. So, yes, I hope that answers his question. There is an exemption.
Senator was able to respond to your question.
He says where? 80 point.
You can take a quick recess, Madam Speaker.
Okay, we're going to take a brief recess. The legislature's back in session. Senator Blas, were you able to get the answer?
Yes, I was, and I want to thank Senator Tommy Morrison for contributing immensely to the whole conversation here. Brought to it. You're very thank you, sir.
But the author was the one who answered your question.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. I just felt like mentioning Tommy Morrison's name today.
Okay. So you still have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, thank you for the recess, and yes, I did confer with the author, and while there is a provision that does recognize, found on page 2, the bottom page 2, unless medically contra indicated, which basically means if there has been a medical determination that the implementation or the utilization of this therapy, of this hormone, will have adverse consequences to the individual. Therefore, the individual not able to take the drug. The issue that I had then is, does that in itself, the ineligibility, make the individual then ineligible for the program, thereby not allowing the individual to go on parole, or even for that much, supervised release or whatnot. This goes to then the requirement, and what is probably the crux of the argument brought on by many of the previous speakers, in its compulsory and its mandatory nature. And so, with that, Madam Speaker, and recognizing that there could be alternatives, there could be options, this is a tool that can be utilized, and not to take away from that, but also in recognizing too that it gives that responsibility. There has to be, you have to cross the T's and dot the I's before you want to implement this program, both medically, professionally, and with regard to the decision of the parole board. I move, Madam Speaker, that on page 3, on line 3, part of subsection C, where it says the parole board shall require, as a condition of parole or post-prison supervision, I move that we change the word shall to may. On page 3, line 3.
On page 3, the
Line
amendment
3.
you're proposing on line 3, on C, subsection C, that the parole board shall be changed to may.
So it's the parole board may require.
May. Does
Okay? So
everybody
there is
understand?
not a condition, of compulsory. And it does recognize that there are maybe sometimes individuals may have the concern or may have the inability to be able to be involved in this because of their medical condition, or what may be an adverse medical condition as a result of the utilization of this, which is not the intent of this bill. So I propose that change.
So on the amendment then to change the word from shall to may on page 3, Senator McCready.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise in support of the amendment. If when I opened my opening remarks, that's what I was talking about, to kind of deliberate and speak with a voice and compromise. That's a compromise, but you get what you can get. And I respect the fact that he is a police officer, former police officer, and he's seen some of these cases. So he knows just as well as any one of us, and in some cases better than us. And so I thank him for that amendment, and I support it. I hope the body supports it as well. Thank you.
Welcome. On the amendment, is there anybody else? Is there any objection? Senator Spauldon, on the amendment?
Yes, on the amendment, Madam Speaker, if I may just have, before you gavel it down or ask for, the vote on this particular motion, because it was just made, if I could just have a minute just to gather some thoughts on whether I would like to make a comment on this at this point. Again, we're talking, we're talking about an amendment that changes it from a mandatory to one of discretion. Right? It was made less than 1 minute ago, right? All I'm asking, Madam Speaker, is a little bit of time to think this one through, just because we're talking about a whole process here. So I'm asking for a 1 minute recess just to think it through.
I'm going to give you
Thank you.
59 seconds. The legislature is back in session. I had asked if there's anyone else who would like to speak on the motion and a request for recess by Senator Espaldon. Would you then, Senator, like to speak then on the amendment?
I appreciate that time off. I'm still going through at this point, I'm not ready to speak on the amendment, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Okay, so then on the amendment, Senator Underwood.
Madam Speaker, the amendment actually changes the nature of the pilot program. So I just want to ask the author, again, going back, because this is a pilot program. A pilot program is actually a test as to whether this is going to work. So I would like to ask the author of this bill about the extent to which the amendment may then affect the outcome of the pilot program.
And you want the author of the bill or the mover of the amendment?
Actually, it's addressed to the
Because I understand, you're right, and that's why I wanted to make sure that, because you're talking about a pilot program versus the actual amendment of changing the verb there.
the amendment may affect the construct of the pilot program. Because when you have a pilot program that originally requires individuals to go to this. Okay, sorry.
Okay.
So when you have a pilot program that originally requires all offenders to be given this, that this is a requirement. A pilot program is a test. It's a research program to determine whether this is effective in deterring these types of behavior. So your sample is going to be a lot bigger. When you change it to a may, right? And I'm addressing the amendment that it's now may. Then the sample size may not be large enough to determine the outcome of what the author of this bill had intended in the first place. And so I'm asking the author to please respond to this, or maybe the mover of the amendment, the extent to which the pilot program, the construct of that pilot program would be affected by the amendment.
Senator McCready, can you please come into the session hall and respond to the question? Senator McCready, do you yield to the question?
What's the question?
By,
I thought you was yielding to the author of the amendment.
no, I asked specifically, and the author or the mover of the amendment, because, well, I don't want to re-ask the question. I'm going to ask the senator to ask the question again of you, so you have the opportunity to respond.
Okay. So, Madam Speaker, I am asking the author of the bill to explain the extent to which the proposed amendment to change this to a may, so that it's not mandatory, the extent to which the construct of his proposed pilot program would then be affected in light of the fact that when you change the bill from a mandatory to an option, the sample size will change. And so if the intent of the pilot is to determine the extent to which this treatment program is effective in deterring the behavior, then, I just need to ask him if this amendment that he doesn't may affect the soundness of the pilot program.
I think
Madam
that
Speaker,
I think that the mover of the amendment wants to yield to answer the questions. So-
And I think that in order to be able to address that, and she's got a very valid concern. And truth be told, I was going to move a little bit backwards on this in my presentation of an amendment, because my next amendment was to remove the word pilot. Okay? I know that there's a lot of concern and a lot of question with regards to that. The utilization, everybody can interpret the word pilot in a number of things. Pilot can be initial. It could be, statistic. It could be a number of things. I think that there's just that one word is causing a whole lot of heartache. And it's taking away from truly what is the intent, I believe is the intent. Now, that could be arguable and everything down the road. That's it. It's just, that was my intent, is to move backwards actually, and I apologize. But I thought for me, in my thought process, it was necessary to set that, to set up the move to remove that word after I make this change in this word. Because she's right, it does change a lot of things, but I don't think it should change the intent.
So your answer to your question then, whether it will affect it, of course, is that
So
yes.
quite honestly, the question may be a moot question, or maybe it may answer the
But
question.
specific to just that, the answer is
Specific,
yes.
yes.
Okay. So Senator Underwood, you still have the floor. You still have the floor.
Okay, so.
On the amendment. Yes.
Okay, so now my understanding is that there is another amendment that will be coming up that will now not make this a pilot program, take out the word pilot. Pilot, so this now changes the whole bill to, this is a program that will be instituted without any testing. This is just going to be a program instituted permanently. That's my,
That's the indication.
I'm sorry.
So on the amendment now, which is of course to change then the word from shall to may.
Again, well,
Okay,
I
so-
think he's answered the question.
Yes.
And then we'll address the other
Okay. So
concerns later.
on the amendment then to delete shall and replace it with may, are there any objections? No objections then, so Senator Blas, you still have the floor.
Thank you. Well, ma'am, go back to what I'm going to do. And as is evident in the, and she's got a very valid concern, very valid point. And she takes it from the idea of many years of having to deal with, pilot programs from that aspect. I, for one, could have seen it in a different light, that the pilot program basically means the first of its kind. But then I think we're both in agreement here that one of the things that may be necessary is in this program is, okay, we got to find some way to be able to address this effectiveness. Is this something that we just put as a new program and just let it go and not even come back to see whether or not there's any effectiveness to this? I don't think so. So I believe that probably, and this is in advance and in anticipation, that this amendment does, my next amendment does pass, is moving forward with regards to possibly looking at, okay, how long do we make this program run before we actually come back and we see the results on this thing? That'll be another argument or a different argument after this one. So, ma'am, recognizing that there is that concern with regards to, again, what kind of a program is this? Okay? I think the concern here is the utilization of the word pilot. Again, there may be some, different interpretations of this. That's something we definitely do not want to have, in legislation, and something that is as critical and as significant as this is concerned. I believe that my motion would be to remove the word pilot in every place that it exists, in the bill. That way, one, we recognize this is a treatment program, yes. And granted that it's new, I don't think it's necessary to be able to say the inaugural, the pilot, the initial. It's a treatment program. And as a result of the previous amendment that proffered and was passed, it's not a compulsory program. Okay? It's an option, it's an alternative, it's a means, a means to be able to get to the next point.
So on the amendment then would be to delete the word pilot.
Yes.
And wherever it is in the sections of the bill. So on that amendment, is anyone who would like to speak on the deletion of the word pilot? Senator Underwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I object to the removal of the word pilot. The consequences of this program to individuals, notwithstanding what they have done, is really far-reaching. So I would think that because, you know, nationwide, I believe there are probably between 6 and 9 states that have, only 6 or 9 states that have actually implemented this. That would be important for us to determine the extent to which this is effective first. So the removal of the word pilot, I would have to object to, because again, based on the primary intent of this bill, it then now changes this into a permanent type of, even if it is an optional treatment. So on those bases, Madam Speaker, and based on what had been noted by previous speakers in their opposition to the bill itself, I would then object to removing the word pilot. I believe that the intent here was to test this out initially, and I think rightfully so. But part of the problem was that the construct was not clearly stated in the bill. So I just want to reiterate that this really should be a pilot program. The removal of the word pilot, I would object to at this point. Thank you.
You're welcome. Senator McCready on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If I heard the author of the second amendment, which removes the pilot, if I heard him correctly, he's making a couple amendments to the pilot program. So if I can just...
No, it's only to delete.
No, I know,
the
but if I
pilot.
could just yield the question to the author of the amendment. Removing the pilot program, he also said that he was going to complement that with a sunset provision. And I just want to make sure if that was clear of what I heard and if that's his intention. Because that would make if he would add the sunset provision, then that would make the pilot program language basically still a pilot program. But if he's going to remove it with the sunset provision, then I wanted to know if that was his intention.
Senator Blas, do you yield to the question?
Yes, I do, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, actually, it's not so much a sunset, but an evaluation period, okay? I mean, that way it may cause for a sunset on this thing. My next amendment actually was going to be put a 3-year period in as far as evaluation, okay, on whether or not the effectiveness of the program.
You really are doing this backward, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. That answers the question.
And I think that there's a method to the madness, man. You know, is basically I recognize and I can see some of the things, and maybe it's, and I'm going to take responsibility for it, and I apologize, but that was the concern and the issue, and I recognize and I agree with the speaker on the good colleague, my good colleague who objects to the amendment, and that, you know, there was that purpose and the necessity, one, because it is a pilot program, but she had the other concerns. Now, I'm hoping to be able to address this by basically saying, look, okay, so this is going to be a program that's going to be implemented, but again, I don't want a program that we're going to put into law, and then it's going to be put on a shelf, and then the only thing we're going to do is take it out, well, you know, every once in a while, dust off the cobwebs, and utilize it. No, there has to be, let's cross our T's, dot our I's, but let's also check to see whether or not this is truly effective. Is it effective or not? Is it worth something worth going on to? I also need to point out, Madam Speaker, that we're making this, we're codifying this. If this was going to be, this is going to be part of the Guam Code annotated. Okay, so I don't want to treat this. This is a codified treatment program. If it's going to pass, as opposed to other programs that may exist that don't exist in statute. Okay, so but I think that it's necessary. First off, to address some of the concerns and some of the ambiguity that may exist in this, and then put that it's going to be necessary to put the evaluations. Maybe this is something we should do with all programs that we have within the government of Guam. And maybe this could be the start of it. And then with this legislation, is actually put that it's time specific before you move on. We do that with contracts. Okay, so I know I'm veering off and going further than what it is. Again, it's, I hope that we can deal with the motion before us is to remove the word pilot.
So Senator McCready, was he? Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the deletion of the word pilot throughout the bill for a pilot program? No objection? Yes, I'm sorry, there is an objection. So all then in favor of the deletion of the word pilot, please raise your hand.
Deletion of the word pilot.
Yeah, deletion, because that was your motion.
Right.
So it's one. Yes.
Yeah, raise your hand.
6 votes failed. Senator, you still have the floor.
Okay. Recognizing, Madam Speaker, I will try with that one. And maybe what I can do is as I'm still going to move forward with my next amendment, is recognizing that it's a pilot program now. I still believe that there should be that opportunity to be able to evaluate this program at a certain time specific. And so I propose, if you can give me a little bit of recess so that I can consult with
we'll take a recess for you to work your amendment. The legislature is back in session. Senators, we left off with Senator Blas requesting for recess to prepare some amendments, and you should all, I'm thinking that there are two. I understand two sheets.
Actually, there's a slew.
There's two,
There's two that's in your hand.
yes,
There's four total.
four total. So we'll work with the two that we have
Yes.
then? Okay, so Senator, you still have the floor then.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the first one that I want to address is actually the longer one that everybody should have. It proposes that on page 2, line 13, it actually amends section 80.101A to include in subsection A, after the word post-prison supervision, or the words, it says evaluation of this pilot program will be completed no later than 3 years after the date of implementation of the program, and an evaluation report shall be transmitted to the parole board upon completion. This will complement, and it will be again the second amendment that's being proposed on the sheet. Will then it'll be, for lack of a better term, reiterated in the rules section of the bill.
Okay, but we're going to bifurcate this, and
Yes,
we're going to
please.
deal with the first. So the first amendment will be on page 2, on subsection A, on line 13, after the word supervision, is to add the new language. Evaluation of this pilot program will be completed no later than 3 years after the date of implementation of the program, and an evaluation report shall be transmitted to the parole board upon completion. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this amendment? Senator Underwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have an appreciation of this amendment in that it will be transmitted to the parole board upon completion. And so, again, I think there would need to be, so what does the parole board then do upon completion of the evaluation? Do they read it and then put it on the shelf? Do they read it to then determine whether they would recommend the continuance of the program, or whether the results of the evaluation will be used to determine whether they would continue or terminate the program? That's...
And Madam Speaker, I think to address hers, I think it's that we then, there is direction to the parole board that, once they get this, they in turn make the determination as to whether or not it should be continued or carried on. So I look to the wisdom and I look to the assistance of legal counsel to be able to make sure that when the parole board gets this, that there is that direction as to what they're going to do with that information. Do they then use that to determine whether or not they want to continue the program? The program should continue. Okay.
Can we take one brief recess?
Sure.
The legislature is back in session. And Senator Underwood, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would just like to make an amendment to the amendment, if I could do that.
Yes.
To further clarify, I would add after, upon completion period, that a decision to continue or terminate the program will be determined by the results of the evaluation.
Can you repeat it again? Yes,
Okay.
please.
A decision to continue or terminate the program will be determined by the results of the evaluation. By the
Okay.
results of the evaluation.
A decision to continue or terminate the program will be determined by the results of the evaluation. Does everybody understand that?
That's the amendment that I'm,
And can you please make sure we have that in writing as well? I mean, we wrote it down, but we want to make sure. On the amendment to the amendment, is there any discussion? Senator Espaldon.
Let me wrap my head around this one. So the addition would be that a decision to continue or terminate this program will be determined by the results of the evaluation. And so by implication, the Department of Corrections, I imagine, or the parole board, I'm not sure, would be the ultimate determiner of whether to continue this program or not.
Yes.
Based
Because the results
upon-
is going to the parole board.
Based upon the previous sentence, that evaluation of this pilot program will be completed no later than 3 years after the date of implementation of the program, and an evaluation report shall be transmitted to the board. I guess the problem I have is, if we're the ones who are establishing this program, we should be the ones to make that determination of whether this program continues or not based upon the report. So I have a problem with that in terms of now this policy gets to be terminated by not the policy-making body of this island, but by a department. It's not really clear just yet. I guess or the parole board. And if I may ask that question to the profferer of this amendment, what does she imagine, or what does she understand, which body would make that determination? Will it be the Department of Corrections, or will it be the parole board?
Senator, do you yield to the question?
yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. That's actually a very valid question and comments, and I actually just need more time to further tighten this amendment that I have, so may I have a couple of minutes, Madam Speaker?
Actually, why do we do this? Because there
Yes, go
are
ahead.
3 other amendments, possibly the 4th with you. We're going
Okay.
to take a recess until then this afternoon at 2 o'clock. What? Yeah? Okay, right, no objection. So